I feel a real vibe of activism amongst our speakers today, and I hope that it is connecting with all of you too, that everyone that we are bringing here on stage is able to make a difference some way, and part of that is coming on the stage here and having the courage to share their stories. The next issue that I would like us to explore is on an important debate that the fashion industry has been having for years, and that's about the use of fur in fashion. So I've learned that intelligent people can actually disagree on this topic, and I asked informed people on both sides of the debate to lay out their arguments, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask them some questions afterwards. First, I'd like to welcome PJ Smith from the American Humane Society. PJ's played an instrumental role in Gucci's landmark announcement this year to ban fur from its collections, which once again brought the fur debate back into the conversation. And famously, Gucci's CEO Marco Bizzarri said at the time of the announcement that fur was not modern. So let's welcome PJ Smith.
What an honor it is to talk in front of you guys. This is just an amazing experience, and I want to start off by telling you a little bit about myself. I had a pretty normal childhood, except for two things. One, my mom was raised in rural Ohio on a farm and went vegetarian in the 1960s because my grandpa told her where her cow friend was going to eventually end up. And so because of that, she raised my sisters and I vegetarian from birth. The second thing is, around 7 years old, I started doing musical theater. And shortly after, I was starring in the Broadway show Les Miserables as the boy who dies at the end. I hope I don't give away too much. But I did that for about 5 years, and I was tutored, and I traveled, and I just wanted to go home at that point. So I packed up and went back to rural Ohio, and I was this vegetarian Broadway kid in Manhattan clothes. And needless to say, my classmates thought I was a little different. So shortly after I returned home, I was biking home from school, and this big Rottweiler German Shepherd mix came out of nowhere and started following me. And I ran all the way home, and he followed me all the way home. And when I got there, he just sat down. And I noticed he didn't have any ID tags on him. And I took a closer look, and Jake was his name going to be, he had a rope that was really tied tightly around his throat, and it was actually embedded in his skin. So if you know what you know about my mom at this point, you can assume that Jake found his new home that day. And Jake and I did everything together, and our favorite thing was playing catch, and he would just go get the ball, bring it back, and I would throw the ball, hit it with a baseball bat, and he would go, bring it back, and just wait there in anticipation for me to do it again. This one time, though, I threw it up, and he prematurely jumped for the ball, and as I'm swinging, and I hit him across the head. And I remember the sound that he made. It was a scream and a whimper as he ran away. And he was okay. He lost a tooth then, but he became symbolic to me that day. He was my best friend, and I hurt him. And I told myself that day, and it rings true today, that if I wouldn't want it done to Jake, I wouldn't want it done to any creature. And that's what brought me to Animal Protection and eventually the Humane Society of the United States, where I'm the senior manager of fashion policy. And in that role, I work with brands, designers, retailers like Gucci, Yux Net-a-Porter, Armani, to implement policies that reflect the company's values and also customers' changing attitudes towards animals. And it's happening industry-wide, all industries this is happening in, and it's now reaching fashion. And it's reaching fashion very quickly with brands that don't want to have the risk of being associated with animal cruelty and also want to capitalize on those changing attitudes. And why fur? So fur, you're talking about mink, raccoon dogs, foxes. These are wild animals. They've been bred for pelt quality. not for domestication, not for a human-animal bond. And in the wild, they run great distances, they dig, they take care of their young. And mink are semi-aquatic, so they spend a majority of their life in or near water. So you take those natural behaviors away from them and put them in a wire bottom cage for their entire life, and they literally go insane. You're going to see them pacing back and forth in cages, you're going to see them self-mutilating themselves, and they're going to live in constant fear. And that fear is only ended, that suffering and that fear is only ended by death. And that death, the standards are anal electrocution for bigger animals and crude gassing techniques for animals like mink. So that's fur factory farms. The other way that animals are sourced for fur is trapping. And that's the most common trap is called a leg hold trap, which has been banned in over 100 countries worldwide. But this just holds the animal for days, even weeks. And during that time, the animal can gnaw off its own limb. Another animal could come, they can die from exposure, and traps are not selective. So every year, every trapping season, we hear the same thing. Threatened and endangered species are being trapped in these traps, and pets, just like Jake. So I've been doing this for about 8 years, and in that time, I would say that the last 3 years have really been monumental. And it kind of started when I went to meet with Inditex in Spain. And I sat down with the 7 decision makers of the organization, and including Mr. Ortega, who was the founder. And he actually, while I was in the meeting, side story, he became the second richest man in the world because the quarterly numbers were released. So the second richest man in the world tells me, we see what's happening in all these other industries, and we think it's going to be huge in fashion in about 5 years, and we want to be leaders. Well, when the second richest man in the world says something, you listen, and he's been 100% right. We're seeing brands, again, no longer wanting to be associated with that risk of animal cruelty, and they want to be on top of this change that consumers are driving. So we have Armani saying technological progress made with faux fur and alternatives makes the cruelty unnecessary. Yux Net-a-Porter, they surveyed 25,000 of their customers, including the ones that spend over $1 million on their sites, and they said go fur-free. And now we just had, most recently, Gucci saying that it's not modern and creativity can jump to different directions besides just using real fur. And fur production is also still has problems with animal welfare and transparency because this industry is very self-regulated. Because of that, entire cities are banning fur sales. São Paulo, Brazil, West Hollywood, California, Berkeley, California. It's a criminal act to sell fur there. And they're looking to do that in Israel as well, to be the first country. We're seeing entire countries ban fur production. So UK did it over a decade ago, but we're seeing Croatia, Czech Republic, the Netherlands. They recently have done it. And there's going to be more and more countries. While that's all happening, faux fur is getting better and better and better. And everyone's using it, and it's almost indistinguishable from the real thing. And what's even cooler is now we're having this cultured leather that I'm sure you'll be hearing about, or if you already have. And people are already trying to figure out how they can do it for fur as well. So Mr. Ortega said 5 years. This all happened in the last 3 years. So as you can imagine, I'm really, really excited for the next 2 years. We're going to see more and more brands. I can promise you, because we have big names that are already, I know, that are going to be going fur free. There's going to be more cities that are going to be banning fur sales and more countries banning fur production. And I just want to really quickly, again, just tell you what an honor it is to be able to speak in front of you guys and tell my story and tell Jake's story. I can remember the day that Jake died, and I had to bury him. He was a big dog, so it was a big hole. And it was rainy, it was cold in Ohio, so the ground was almost frozen. And he was a really, really good boy, and I miss him every single day. And I know we don't have the same relationship with mink and foxes and raccoon dogs that we have with our pets and the animals we spend our lives with. But I can tell you that Their lives are just as important to them as Jake's life was to him. And I know a lot of you in this room and out there know that and are creating modern, beautiful designs that leave the cruelty off. And you're not only making the world a more beautiful place, but you're making it a better place. And I thank you.
So like I said, there are two sides to the fur debate. And now I'd like to welcome Frank Zilberkwhite, who is the director of the British Fur Trade Association. Frank is also the chairman of the Polar Group, a British firm that once owned Hockley. He is a fifth-generation fur trader and one of the most renowned fur brokers in the world. So for the other side of the debate, I'd like to welcome Frank.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to be in front of you. I'm here at the last moment because I'm not really a natural speaker like my predecessor, but the guy who's meant to speak to you today, Mark Oaten, who's the chairman of the IFF, unfortunately is unwell, and I hope you're feeling better, Mark, if you're watching the streaming. Well, what can I talk to you about fur? You hear a lot of hype talk about how cruel we are, how we have no care about welfare, and how there are better alternatives. Well, let's talk about one thing. The byword in the fashion industry, I believe, is sustainable. When you make a faux fur, you are making a petrochemical product which is not biodegradable. If you watch The Lonely Planet, you'll see our oceans are being polluted by all these little molecules of plastic which are destroying marine life. They're destroying environment where wild animals live and prosper. Our industry is about raising animals in a natural way, in a kind way, in a high standard of welfare, and is renewable resource. You can take a fur coat and you can reuse it for 20, 30, 40 years. One of the previous speakers talked about the circular economy in fashion. The fur trade's been doing that for centuries. We have a high standard of welfare that is imaginable. Most of the brands that use fur have visited fur farms and have seen for themselves the standards that are being achieved today. There's certification all over Scandinavia, and there's a welfare program that will reach out to over 4,000 fur farms in Europe alone. And this is not only just about how the animals are raised, how they're killed or slaughtered, but also what happens to their pelts after they've been slaughtered, the tanning processes and the dyeing processes. All of it is being done to the highest standard in order that we can have a clean reputation. Brands that don't use fur, and there are not too many of them because the vast majority do, also use leather. They use reptile skins. They use sheep skins. Tell me, what's the difference? I don't understand this difference. I don't understand the discrimination against fur when we use all other products which also come from animals. It's rather illogical, and it doesn't make intellectually any sense whatsoever. We also have a saying in the fur business that a good fur can only be produced from an animal which has been well cared for. So in bad times, when the industry is suffering from an economic downturn, the fur farms that go out of business are the ones that have the lowest welfare standards. The ones that have the best standards continue to prosper and grow, and the animals prosper as well. Fur is a modern product today because we've updated our range, our techniques, our skills in producing fur. Fur is also about human beings. It's about communities in the wild, the Inuit community, the farming community. These people are in touch with nature. These people work in the fur business. There are 1 million plus people in the world working in the fur industry, whether it's Inuit in the north of Alaska or Canada, or if it's the farmer in Namibia or in Scandinavia, or if it's the fur worker in Greece. All these people who have humble lives but work very hard and can maintain their communities, and fur is a part of that, their culture. And it is presumptuous of us in the West to assume that if an Inuit goes trapping for a fur, that he shouldn't be allowed to do that when this is part of his tradition, his culture for centuries. And we should be more in touch with this because we become remote in the West. We become disconnected. We become unaware of where our roots as human beings are. We Disneyfy our animals. We give them human characteristics. That's not reality. Animals kill each other. We kill each other. We eat animals. We eat billions of animals every year. We raise billions of animals every year. Of course, you can be a vegan. You can choose not to eat animals. You can choose not to wear fur. That is your freedom of choice, and that is you should be respected. And we respect that in the fur industry too. But at the same time, please respect us, because we are providing livelihoods for 1 million plus people around the world. We have an industry that is worth $30 billion in sales worldwide. And we have very successful companies who are doing very well out of the fur business. I'll give you one example. Canada Goose. Canada Goose uses goose down inside the jacket and coyote fur to trim it. They had an IPO in New York earlier in the year at $14. Today, their shares are just under $27. So don't tell me that there isn't economic success to be had by working in the fur trade. And so it goes on with people like Montclair, with people like Mr. and Mrs. Italy. These are all fashion brands which thrive because they use fur. Now, I remember when I was a kid, I was in Japan. I read the Japan Times. Harrods has shut down its fur department. Tragedy. It's the end of the fur business. Today, Harrods is one of the largest fur retailers in the world. If you walk through Harrods, you'll see thousands of fur garments, various different brands. You will see brands like Fendi and Versace and Valentino and Harrods' own brand, and Yves Solomon and Dennis Basser, all having prominent positions in this store, which we were told that 25, 30 years ago, Harrods would never touch a fur garment. Well, you know, fashion is a fickle business, as you all know. Trends come and the trends go. And there may be a trend now for a company to give up fur but still produce reptile, snakeskin handbags. But this is just today's mood. Tomorrow, who knows what will be. All I can say is look at Harrods. They were out of the fur business, and they're really now leading the fur business. I think I've run out of time. I've tried my best to talk to you off the cuff, unprepared. I hope I've educated you a little bit. And thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Frank. I have to give Frank credit. He literally had an hour's notice because our previous speaker had a sudden illness and couldn't come. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. I want to spend a few minutes engaging in this conversation a little bit more. Can we lift the house lights so that if there are questions from the audience here that we can take them? My first question to PJ is one of the issues that Frank has raised here. Is like, what's the difference between leather and fur? Like, how do you justify that? He said it was illogical.
Well, I think I try to explain this, that for leather, it's very much part of food production. And when we're talking about fur, we're not eating fox, we're not eating mink. And again, these are wild animals. They haven't been domesticated. And I think that's just the main difference right there.
Okay. And what about this issue around faux fur, which some people say is environmentally unsafe and damaging to the environment?
Sure. I would say that the real devastation to the environment is the fur industry. We're talking about thousands of animals that are raised on fur factory farms where urine and feces go into the ground, go into the waterway, in the water there. Those pelts are taken to a toxic soup of formaldehyde and carcinogenic chemicals, and chromium as well. And then at the end of the day, it's never going to be environmentally friendly to take out of the wild threatened and endangered species. And again, environmentalists also are not going to be okay with live skinning of raccoon dogs and anal electrocution, which has been well documented in the fur trade. Okay,
so that brings me to my question for you, Frank, which is, I mean, you said that the fur industry has raised its standards, that there's, better protection of the animals, but it's pretty clear that that's not always the case, that in some cases, the fur industry can be extremely cruel to animals.
Well, let me tell you a few things. First of all, the animals are over 100 generations on fur farms, so they're not coming from the wild. Secondly, just to show how much facts can be misconstrued, there is no formaldehyde used in any European tanning process at all, whatsoever. So that is an untruth. Thirdly, the skinning alive of animals does not happen on any fur farm in Europe that is regulated under the welfare system. And that is also an old wives' tale, and it's not something that happens in Europe at all. I've never seen it. I've never heard of it. It's absolutely untrue.
Okay.
Yeah.
One question, though.
Yeah.
A lot of the fur industry is not in Europe. A lot of it remains unregulated, and it's happening in countries where there aren't the same levels of protection, and especially with fast fashion, where you're taking fur and you're putting it in a really cheap garment. How can we be guaranteed that fur from those environments is safe?
Like I said to you before, only the good survive in our industry, yes? And all the best fur farms and all the successful fur farms are located in Europe or North America, where there's the highest of standards. The ones which you could refer to in the Far East are out of business. And quite honestly, any responsible fashion house will check their facts and only work with sustainable, regulated and certified fur, and that's what we encourage them to do. That's what our international federation encourages them to do, that's what the BFTA encourages them to do, and that's what responsible retailers want them to do. In every industry, journalism, politics, law, accountancy, banking, there are people who deviate from the rules. It can happen in my industry too, but we are constantly trying to improve ourselves and raise our standards, and that is human nature, and we want to expose and get rid of the bad elements and only have the good elements which responsible fashion brands work with.
Okay. I'd like to open up questions from the audience. Does anyone have a question they'd like to ask anywhere? Yes, there's one here on the right-hand side.
In trying to grapple with this issue, I feel that the critter, sweet, cuddly mink animal issue sort of gets a bad rap, because if you think of the size of the industry, do you prize a mink over a chicken? Because I don't need to wear fur, I do wear fur, but I also don't need to eat chicken. And the conveniencism and the industrialization and the desperate conditions of chickens, to me, is so much more of an enormous issue than the much smaller, more regulated issue of the mink farming industry.
PJ, what are your thoughts?
Well, with chickens, it's an issue that, Europe's been really far ahead, and North America are now creating policies like McDonald's, Walmart. They're all mandating farming policies to get rid of cages. So that's gestation crates for pork, for pigs, and that's battery cages for egg-laying hens and chickens, because they want to get them out of the cages. Again, this isn't possible with mink. This isn't possible with foxes, because, if they were domesticated, you could have them play around. And to just tell you, what happens to a domesticated fox is their ears flop over, their tails bend, and they act like a dog because they're part of the dog family. So again, yeah, you have a choice. And more companies have a choice to see what kind of impact they want to make. And the reality is, more and more consumers and more companies are really caring about this issue. And I think we're going to continue to see more huge companies start making policies that will make your decision a lot easier.
Thank you, Giulietta, for your question. Thank you, PJ. Thank you, Frank. That's the fur debate. All right.